Hey, Malcolm, you know that Audible's got a lot more than audiobooks?
Of course, podcasts,
Originals,
bestsellers,
future bestsellers,
sleep stories.
sleep story. What are you talking about, sleep story? Malcolm. Oh, wow. Malcolm. Malcolm. Hey, no, Roxy. Hey, Roxy, get out of Malcolm's house.
The most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories, all in one place. Audible.
Hi, I'm Elle Jackson, professor, mom, writer, wife, designer, and I'll be moderating today's panel. Thank you for tuning in to the 26th Annual Festival of Books and our virtual event, Fiction Swept Away by Romance. Today's panel features Amelie Howard, best-selling author of The Princess Stakes, Eloisa James, an English professor and best-selling author of the Wilds of Linlow Castle series, along with many others. Erica Ridley, best-selling author of many historical romance novels, including her latest, The Duke Heist, and Vanessa Riley, award-winning author of A Duke, The Lady, and a Baby, and her brand new An Earl, the Girl, and a Toddler. Please remember to support your local independent bookstores during the festival. Signed book plates are available with your purchase of these authors' books through The Ripped Bodice. Amelie, Eloisa, Erica, and Vanessa, welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
It's so good to see each of you, and I'm super excited to be a part of this panel. You all are all amazing writers. And so I want to get started just by asking you, how did you find yourself to be in the historical romance genre? And I will direct that first question at Eloisa.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this, Elle. I found myself in historicals because that's what I loved to read the most when I was younger. And then I went to graduate school to become a Shakespeare professor, which I am now. And that sort of led directly towards being a romance author. But because the Renaissance doesn't sell, I had to actually investigate a whole new realm. So I've written in the Regency and the Georgian. And that's how I found my way here.
Awesome. Amelie?
So my thanks for having me also, and thanks for doing this, Elle. My route is a little circuitous. I started out in young adult. I was published in young adult, and then a friend of mine and I decided to open a Google Doc one day because we loved reading historical romance and about dashing dukes or manly marquesses. And we started writing this book together and realized by the end of a couple months that we had a completed manuscript, and then we submitted it to our agents and we had our first book. So my first foray into historical romance is co-written with Angie Morgan, and we had 7 books together, and then I went out solo. But that was my start.
Wow, that is a very unique start. Erica, how about you?
When I was younger, I always wanted to write, but my favorite author was Stephen King. So I thought I would write horror books. And as a little kid in elementary school, I would fill up these spiral notebooks with these horrible, horrible stories. And I'm sure my parents were very concerned. And then one day I came across my first romance novel. Joanna Lindsay was my gateway drug. And I think I read that book in 3 hours, and that was it. I fell in love with the genre and inhaled everything I could find. And so when I started writing, I knew that's where I wanted to begin.
That's super funny. I was really into horror too when I was younger. So we have a shared experience for Erica. Vanessa, how did you find yourself to be a romance writer, historical romance?
A pure accident, as well as a passion. Back in school, I loved anything to do with Western civilization. I loved history, but I also had this thing for math. So I was pretty gifted in looking at calculus and differential equations and smiling. And my mother always told me, the very first thing is always make sure you can pay your bills. So I went to school for engineering. Got my doctorate from Stanford University's metallurgy. So if anybody has any broken metal around the house, ship it to me. But there gets a point in your life where your true passion always comes back. And I was pregnant with my daughter. It was a difficult pregnancy. And the doctor says, there are two outcomes if you do not sit down and just take some time off and rest. And so I literally sat down, started looking at some of my old notebooks, and fell in love again with these stories of hope and happy ever afters. And I just started writing. And so I've, combined my love of history and writing, and here we are.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for sharing each of your experiences. I know for a lot of readers, historical romance is such a big genre, and they are so devoted and loyal. And it's just amazing to have each of you here with us. I wanted to know, what do you find most interesting, exciting, engaging about your novels? So is it the research process? Is it the characters that come to you, or something else? So what is that most exciting, most engaging aspect of writing historical fiction? And we'll start with Vanessa.
The most engaging thing, of course, is the happy ever after. It's got to be fun. It's got to be, we've tortured these poor people. We've brought them a long way together, and now they are better together. They are whole as individuals, but they're better together. And as a historical romance writer, I love to seed the ground with history. I love to put people in places that I've discovered through my research. I love to tell you things that you may not have known, because there's so much history that's been hidden or whitewashed or just completely obliterated, that can add so much richness and help us know in these present times that love always survives. There's always a way. And those are the things I like to share in my books.
Yeah, I love what you said, sharing that historical aspect, especially the hidden histories, the ones that we didn't get to learn about in school and that kind of thing. So definitely. Amelie, can you answer that same question?
Sure. I mean, I agree with what Vanessa said. I think that, that journey to the happy ever after is obviously the most satisfying piece of any awesome historical romance, or romance for that matter, whether it's a happy for now or happy ever after. But what Vanessa touched on about writing about different people in history, I actually really like that. And with this current series, my next book coming out, I do write about a BIPOC heroine. She's a mixed race heroine. So I did a lot of research into actual people who lived during the Victorian era, like Sophia Duleep Singh, who was a sick princess, who was Victoria's goddaughter. But, she did experience quite a bit of racism in the court. So I felt to the story, I wanted to add that level of authenticity. I wanted to do the research and make sure that I portrayed her correctly on the page, while also incorporating some of my background as a diverse creator. I was born in the Caribbean, so ex-British sugar colony, and obviously growing up here in the United States, I've put some of my own experience on the page, bringing her to life. So for me, that was the most exciting thing about writing this particular book, just because I think we need more diverse stories. We need to see exactly what you had said before, Elle. We need more of these stories we didn't hear about before on the page in readers' hands.
And we are definitely going to dive into, diversity and inclusion. And we're going to talk about the importance of representation in such a big genre. But for now, I want to know from Eloisa, what keeps you coming back to the historical genre?
Well, I totally honor what everyone else is saying, but you can probably tell I'm about as white as you can get. So diversity is something that I want to encourage and support in every way I can. But I will say that for me, what I love finding is some weird historical fact that I can build a plot around. So, just to give you an example, I built an entire book around the fact that a pineapple in England at a certain period of time cost like $5,000, $4,000. And it was so, you wanted to have it for your dinner party so much that you would rent one and you put it in the middle of the table and it was rented and everyone knew you couldn't eat it because it was just there as like this proof of, how rich you are, except you weren't because you actually rented it. And one pineapple might travel from house to house because it was so expensive. But my American heroine didn't know that, so she ate the pineapple. So it's when I can find wonderful little details like that, you've got history, but you're not sort of teaching people the history. You're just making it part of a plot. And, I know that readers will then send me like 10,000 socks with pineapples on it and necklaces with pineapples and cat collars with pineapples, but I just really love it, and I love sharing that kind of weird wonderful detail.
But readers send you pineapples? How can I get in on some of that?
They send me pineapple objects.
Well, that is really interesting. So, Erica, we don't want to leave you out of the question. What keeps you coming back to historical fiction?
I love transporting readers into my imagination. So for me, it's a mix of the history, which gives me certain limitations, and then combine that with usually the genesis for any given story. It'll come to me a specific scene, some wild situation that I can put these two very specific people in, and I'll usually think it's hilarious. And it may be a scene that's in the middle of the story or toward the end, or it might even be how they meet. And I'll just get so excited about it that I can't wait for people to read this scene. So a little bit like Eloisa said with a historical fact, I'll just have this amazing scene idea where it's the scene that I want readers to tell their friends, you have to read this book, you have to read the scene where she kidnaps a duke on accident or whatever. And then I just get excited about diving into the next book.
Awesome. Eloisa kind of shared something that leads us into this next question, which is, what have your readers shared with you, emailed you about that has really surprised you and even maybe had an impact on your writing and who you are as a writer? And we will start with Erica.
Okay. So this a little bit two different questions for me. So what was surprising for me was the first time someone told me that they wait until my entire series comes out so that they can binge all the books at one time in one weekend. Another surprising thing is when I learned how many people out there read the last chapter first. I would never, and some of my closest friends do exactly that. So that was really interesting. Feedback that has changed me as a writer. I've had several readers say that my characters or my humor has gotten them through hard times, and that really stuck with me. And I try to make that be a part of everything that I write, because I know people are counting on romance, not just mine, to bring them to a better place.
Awesome. We'll go with Vanessa next.
The thing that has been most heartwarming is when people write back and they say, this book hit me right at the moment that I needed it. I needed something that was funny and engaging, and it just really got them through. The other thing, which is extremely special, is when they say, I saw myself in your book. And for a woman of color like myself, that's a huge thing. And to see other people writing and saying that, it's extremely special.
Awesome. Amelie, what is?
I think the most surprising thing is that people are like, oh my gosh, these characters are so witty and funny. And I'm like, why is this surprising? I am super witty and funny all the time. The most impactful thing actually happened this morning. I got an Instagram message from a reader who said that my book helped her through her father's passing. And it just touched me so deeply because she said, thank you for writing this book. I don't know how I would have lived through the last few days. And it was just like right in the field. I have also been impacted by books. And I've always felt that books have saved me at different points in my life. So being able to be an author who has written something that is, means that much to someone is incredible.
Awesome. Eloisa, anything
I
other
guess
than the pineapple inspired items?
I would echo what everyone said about the readers who write you heartrending letters. Those are wonderful. But I also have been surprised by how much readers sort of become attached to one of your characters. So if you're writing series the way I do, and sometimes there's 6 books in the series, I'll give you an example. In the Essex Sisters series, it starts out with 4 sisters, and Josie was very, very young and very plump and being teased for it in the beginning in the first book. And I didn't actually think very much of her because when you're doing 4 sisters, you kind of have to keep everyone juggled. You have to keep the reader focused on the main characters. And then I realized that the majority of my mail was about Josie, not about the heroine. And as the 4 books progressed, I watched as Josie became more and more important to lots of readers who spent a lot of time and gave me their letters telling me experiences they'd had in high school and so on, that I then incorporated some of them into that story of Josie. And it became a much deeper story and a much more true one, I think, because readers were gracious enough to share painful stories they'd had, and it gave me the depth that I needed to create Josie in the final book. Her final book is called Pleasure for Pleasure. And so you should never say that people complain about readers' letters, but I find I actually can learn from them.
Yeah, that is an awesome take on that. And it is amazing, the way that the romance genre has really helped a lot of people. I mean, I hear that a lot when I'm talking with other writers, just that, this genre is popular for many reasons. And one of the most important ones is that it's helping people through some really hard times. And I know, like, over this last year, we've had some hard times. So super, super glad that we are all on this journey together. I'm wondering, as amazing as our historical fiction is, are any of you considering writing any other genres? I know some of you have started in other areas and found yourself here, but now in your career where you are you considering other genres? And I will start, I believe, with Erica.
Yeah, definitely. I have written paranormal romantic comedies and fantasy, things like that. And I have dreamed about writing suspense, which maybe I will try this year. We'll see how that goes. But I love all fiction. There's nothing fiction that I won't read. So basically, I want to write all of it. And my agent tries to rein me in a little bit, but we'll see.
Amelie, what are you thinking? Are you going to write any other genres?
Yeah, I mean, I got my start in young adult science fiction and fantasy. And I think I'm going to try to do historical young adult. I have hopefully a super secret announcement coming up soon that I'll be able to share. And then also, I love writing middle grade fantasy, and I have a kind of a Caribbean folklore adventure story that I hope my agent might take out in the next year or so.
Awesome. Vanessa.
Well, I also write historical fiction. My debut historical fiction is coming out this year, Island Queen.
Yay.
So I'm very excited about that. Like Amelie, I have a couple secret announcements. So you might see me in a mystery kind of way in a historical sense. So we might see something coming out. So stay tuned.
Eloisa?
Well, I took 4 years to write a book that I'm now publishing under my real name. Eloise is my pseudonym. So I actually have a contemporary coming out. It's a love story. And I'm really happy to tell you guys that about 1 hour before this program started, I got the very first review of it. So it's called Lizzie and Dante, and it comes out June 1st. And Publishers Weekly, which is a big deal in our world, actually really loved it. In fact, they didn't say, as my sister pointed out, not even one negative word. They really loved it. So I'm happy about that. It's about a Shakespeare professor, which I am. So it's funny to see. I'm going to see my name on it, and it's a love story, but not a romance. And it's got an 11-year-old girl in it, and I have a daughter. It really forced me to broaden myself. And actually, I found that going back to romance was doubly pleasurable after I finally finished this 4-year thing. So,
Yeah. Well, congratulations on your
thank you.
publisher fee review. That is a huge deal.
And one of the things that I love, Eloise has written a lot of books. You see the passion and I don't want to say fear, that's the wrong word, but it's like you wait for that first review and it comes back and it's glowing and you know you've done your job. And so it is just a wonderful thing. So congratulations.
Yeah,
I agree.
And I hope
So-
none of us lose the passion wherever we are in our career, for every book that comes out.
Mhm.
Right.
Exactly. And that kind of puts us into this next question. So, have you ever made any mistakes, while writing your historical romance or other fiction, even that you wish, if you knew what you knew now, you would do it differently? Have any of you made any mistakes while writing a book? Let's start with Amelie.
Gosh, it's like the hardest question. I'm kidding. Sometimes writing historical romance, historical fiction, you want to make sure that you get the details correct because readers are savvy, and especially readers of historical romance, historical fiction, they're going to call you out if you get something wrong or a certain word didn't exist before a certain time. So etymology.com is like my best friend. So I have made lots of mistakes that have been picked up by beta readers, also by excellent editors who are like, Amelie, this word came out in 2010. Please stop using these anachronisms. So anyway, yes, I've made lots of mistakes, but a good editor, beta readers, they're very helpful.
Yes, they are. They really are. I am right there with you. I've made some mistakes in my very first historical novel that my editor definitely picked out. So, Erica, have you made any mistakes that you wish you could do over?
I think, at least in my case, it would almost be impossible to not have made mistakes. I mean, you don't know what you don't know until you come across a lot of the historical details. I research as much as I can, and I make the books as correct as I am capable of in that particular moment. But as with every new book I write, I learn so much more as I'm investigating different things about the period that I inevitably come across things that I realize, oh, I said it was this way when actually it was that way. In general, not something that I would go back and rewrite the book over, but it's always a constant process of learning new things.
Yeah, for sure. How about Vanessa? Have you made any mistakes?
Oh, no. Yes. You name it, I have done it and have gotten emails about it and corrected where possible. But on the other side of that, because I often describe historical facts that people don't know, I now put a detailed, almost a bibliography and a footnote and author's note in the back of my books, just so that people can see what history that I am talking about in my stories.
Mm-hmm. That's a really smart idea. Eloisa, what are you hoping to not do again? Any mistakes that you've made?
Well, you guys, I've written 30 books. So if there's a mistake, I've made it like 5 times. And like Vanessa, I put a historical note in the back, but it's obvious. Often it's something like, I'm like, I know you all guys are all going to write me and say that rubber was not invented until 5 years after my book. I'm just putting this note here to show you that I know. But I'll tell you something. Erica and I have a book coming out together. It's called Mistletoe Christmas. It'll be coming out this fall, and she was reading the copy of it. So I think it was the proofs, like right before it goes to press. And she writes this little note, and she's like, Eloisa, why is your hero not wearing powder or a wig? And I realized I'm writing Georgian, but Mistletoe Christmas is Regency, and I'm just dumping Georgian details into a Regency, and she caught it. So
awesome, Erica.
You just got to accept it, though. The mistakes are going to be there. I'm glad that one got caught, but that's life, right?
It is. I think that readers are super forgiving, that they do read historical romance, because they're obviously interested. So it's really interesting just to hear about how they will email you and they will inquire if you knew that you did that. So one of the things that I noticed in each of your books, your latest books, was the balancing act, and I think that this is common, with romance. But there's a balancing act. We want characters that are real and authentic and well rounded, but we also have those specific things that readers are going to be looking for. So, like an alpha hero, or a strong female, protagonist, but she needs something. She needs something. She needs this relationship in some way. So, my question is, how have you all managed to balance that so well? I find it to be just one of the most difficult aspects of writing romance in particular. And I'll start with Erica. Can you tell me, how do you balance? How do you make sure that you're meeting the expectations of readers, but at the same time being authentic and telling a really authentic story with these characters?
Sure. So in my case, I spend a lot of time with my characters in my head before I actually start writing the book. I try to really understand who they are, um, the experiences that made them who they are today, and what it is that they want to change or to improve or to hide about themselves. And then the story becomes about peeling back those layers, not just to the reader, but to the love interest, who, as they get closer and closer to the real person who they are, that true self is who they can fall in love with. So I love writing characters who are strong, who know their mind, who are going after something, but that may or may not be the thing that they really need or that they really want. And so then that becomes part of the story too, because I think it's kind of a universal feeling to have wanted something so hard, and then once you have it, like, discover that actually wasn't the thing, and to find the thing you really needed somewhere else.
Eloisa, how do you manage this balancing act of making sure you're meeting reader expectations, but you're also being really authentic to your character's journey and who they are?
Well, mine actually follows perfectly from what Eric said, because my heroine in Wild Child wanted to run away, put on breeches and run away and join a theater troupe and play Hamlet on the stage. She was a really good actor. And, the Duke in the story is incredibly rigid and aristocratic and autocratic. And, my original idea just didn't work, because when I actually created my alpha hero, it's it's not that he wouldn't allow her to do that, it's that it would be genuinely dangerous to her. And so you set up a plot, and sometimes you can't follow it through that way. So I made him very aristocratic, and then I had to do what's called in screenwriting, where you have the save the cat moment. He's actually a huge animal advocate, and he saves the baby pig from being tortured. And the baby pig is a fortune teller. But of course, he's like, no pig can tell fortunes, whatever. And he saves his pig. And I had to do that in order to balance off. He's more autocratic. Like, you can't go off onto the thing, because something, sexual violence will happen to you and your family will be destroyed, which she finally heard. But that would be so, I had to balance it out. It's called Save the Cat. And I've used it a million times, and it does work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of him. I really like that you added that, love of animals, but there's some funny parts in it. I won't spoil it, but okay, Vanessa, can you answer that question?
I will try. Like Erica and Eloisa said, I do spend a lot of time with my characters. I try to inhibit the skin of my characters. I try to be in their bodies. What are they thinking? What are they doing? And in An Earl, the Girl, and the Toddler, there are several moments where you have Daniel Thackeray. Daniel Thackeray is a man of color. He's recently elevated in society. He's titled now. And he was already feeling pressure in his job as a barrister. But now he has this additional set of eyes on him. And there are incidents that happen that if he were of the ton, a normal Earl of the ton, people might laugh off. They think, oh, he's just funny. but he's dealing with some of the aspersions that a man of color would have encountered during that time frame. So trying to be show him as an alpha slash beta-ish hero, but yet being very true to the experiences he would have had, and at the same time showing the readers this different side of how he's delicately trying to balance his world. And hopefully, I'm successful at it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, along with the balancing act that we each have to juggle as romance writers, there's also that aspect that we were kind of touching on earlier, just about inclusion and making sure that we're authentic to time periods and all of this. And I know that Bridgerton has been, a huge success, and that's probably one of our most recent huge successes in our genre. And it had a lot of diversity in the show that is streaming, So I wanted to ask, and I kind of, I don't want to direct it at anyone, but if you want to respond, what has been the impact of Bridgerton on you as a writer, thinking through how widely accepted the diversity in that cast was? Would any of you like to answer that question? You can just raise your hands.
I can go.
Okay.
And I'll go because I'll just tack on to what Vanessa was saying earlier with, creating resilient sort of characters, whether they're female or male. And, she talked about her hero as a man of color. In The Princess Stakes, the heroine is a woman of color. And obviously there's a power imbalance there because her match is a duke and he's a male. So I had to make my heroine a princess because you want to make sure that there's some sort of way to address, especially if there's like a very obvious power imbalance. And with people of color, there in those time periods, there definitely will be. So I'm only talking about that because I didn't answer the previous question, but I feel like with Bridgerton, and people embracing it, it's nice to see people of color on the screen, getting to wear the dresses, getting to, be part of, the aristocratic society. But there's also the flip side of that, which I think Erica touched on, is how do you balance the authenticity, the historical details with the romance of it. So I think I love that Bridgerton brought so many 82 million households into the historical romance world. I think it's great for historical romance writers. And I want to see more diverse stories on the page. And I think the only way we can have, because there's no one right story, especially with people of color, but the more stories you have, the broader and the better it will be, I think.
Agreed, definitely. I think, Vanessa, you wanted to answer that as well?
I was just going to say, when you see the diversity of the cast, first of all, I love the book. Julia Quinn's Duke and I is probably my favorite book of all of her books. And then to see it come to life in this new, vibrant way was so exciting. The diversity adds to the story, and it lent itself to little nuances that you were able to feel some of the culture of the people of these characters inhibiting this space. I can't wait to see Kate Sharma. I think it's going to be amazing.
Yay, me too.
And I just hope it just continues to get through all 8 books. Okay, I'll just keep going and keep bringing in more and more people to the party, because the thing that is done is so many people haven't read romance. They don't understand the magic, and the visual medium has shown them what it really is about. And I'm hoping that people are picking up books, all kind of books, and they're reading them and they're enjoying them and they're seeing this happy ever after. And now we're in a wave where the printed books, the books that are in the stores and the bookstores, they're now diverse. You can get every kind of flavor of romance, and people are just 82, 86 million households and counting are looking for these stories. So it's an exciting time as a romance writer.
Definitely. Erica, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I'm not even white, and it's wild how internalized the idea was for so long that historical romance in specific had to be about rich white people. And it took me a long time to realize that I could write something different. Maybe not in the traditional publishing world at first. My first diverse romances were self-published, but my new series, The Wild Winchesters, with starting with the duchesses, and it's about a family of 6 orphans who are diverse in intersectional ways. So whether that's race or class or nationality or sexuality, whatever. And it's amazing that the market is not just welcoming, but demanding stories that are as diverse as we are as humans and as authors, that you can put yourself and your experiences on the page, and your readers can find themselves in a way that it might not even have occurred to them that they could see themselves before. And I think that's awesome.
I absolutely loved your inclusion of orphans and just how different each of them was. And I think that one of my favorites was your character who dressed up as the old woman, the old aunt. I won't give away much, but I loved it. And I think that, you do a really amazing job of just capturing such a diverse group of people. So I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So there's another aspect of Bridgerton that a lot of people have been commenting on, and it is that idea of consent in romance. And I think times have changed, right? Because what would have been appropriate or not seen as a bad thing maybe 15 or so 20 years ago is different now. And so how do you all deal with the idea and concept of consent in your books? And what did you think? There was a particular scene in Bridgerton that I know a lot of people were talking about as far as consent goes. So let's hear from Elisa. What are your ideas, takes on consent in historical romance?
Well, I just want to say first about Bridgerton, I'm just going to put a word in for Julia Quinn because she just came to Fordham and spoke to my creative writing students, that's where I'm a professor. And she had such an interesting take because she pointed out that when the book actually came out, the scene in question is one in which the heroine sort of doesn't get adequate consent from the hero. He doesn't want to have sex. She knows nothing about her body, right? And she pointed out that when that book first came out 20 years ago, the attitude was, yeah, girl, you go. It was a feminist response, right? That she actually had been sold in marriage with no knowledge of what sex was. And the moment in which she takes control of that sex scene in the way that men had always controlled it completely and continued to because he was playing on her ignorance, was really viewed as this marvelously feminist thing. And so she pointed out how interesting it is as writers for us to watch consent change to the point where now we're equally attuned to the consent of men and women. And I thought they did a great job at trying to sort of gesture towards that without changing too much of the footprint of the original book. I will say that for my own books, it's just different. Like if you think about tropes like kidnapping, for example, kidnapping is a really fun trope. And then you think about putting it in a book, which I was doing with 7 Minutes in Heaven. I was like, yeah, he's going to kidnap her. Whoa, kidnapping just doesn't work anymore. You can feel it in yourself. You can feel yourself getting uneasy. And my hero had to turn and say, do you mind if I kidnap you? And she was like, well, I don't mind for the weekend, And so you've basically turned the trope on its head in order to get consent in the right way, in the way that will make me comfortable and that I know will make, for example, my 22-year-old daughter comfortable. She's the one who would really be after me, even more than my readers, right? Nothing like a humiliated family member to get crossed. So.
Thank you. How about we go to Amelie next?
I think as historical romance writers, we have this challenge of staying true to the period, but we're writing for a modern reader, reading through a modern lens. So with issues like consent, and I agree with Eloisa that I think the show they did a great job with Shonda and Chris with, kind of changing that consent scene slightly, but not like, going completely away from what was written in the book. But I think consent is just, you kind of have to have it because of this modern lens that we're, the modern reader that we're writing for. I feel like with romance, though, just because it's such a wonderful romance, safe space for readers, even with, what Eloisa mentioned about the kidnapping trope, sometimes readers want to read about kidnapping in a safe sort of space. And that's the beauty of romance, is like whatever you like, you can find. As in terms of my own process, I'm very conscious about consent, but I don't overdo it. I think it's a balance.
Definitely. Vanessa, would you like to add to that?
Sure. First off, the way Bridgerton handled the scene. The scene is it's in the Duke and I. It's graphic. It's intense. But Julia took us there so that we could be in this moment where Daphne is taking control, taking power. And like Eloisa said, 20 years ago when it came out, this woman, if you look at it, she has no power. She, once you marry, all of your your income, your assets, everything are controlled by your husband. So she has no power, and this is a moment of taking power. But we fast forward to today, and it's totally a consent issue. And so when I look at my own books, I want to make sure everything's explicit. This is not an area where it can be a he said, she said, at least in my books. It's got to be very clear, because consent is that big of an issue. And I want to make sure that I am not willfully putting a stereotype or doing something that's going to harm a reader.
Right. And so, Erica, I want you to answer that, that question too. But if you wouldn't mind talking about how important or what is your take on making sure that men get that same, male characters get that same respect as we would with women? Do you think it's necessary? What are your thoughts on that?
That was actually a plot point in one of my books, that the heroine was ready. She's like, let's go for it. Let's do this. And he wasn't. And so they didn't, because she respected his consent as well. Like, she felt if she would have pressed it, they probably could have had a love scene right then. But if he wasn't ready at that time, then, he should get that same consideration. So I do think that's important. And probably just like with the times, when I first started writing, I doubt that I had consent at the top of my mind in the way that I do now. But I do try to make it explicit on both sides.
Yeah.
In order for it to truly feel like a love scene.
Well, we are going to be. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that, as a mom, like, I was thinking about this whole consent thing, because we had a discussion last night. My son works at a place called The Summit. Like, it's like, it has like bowling and stuff. And a guest that was there made him take a picture with her in the photo booth, and she was a mom. And we had this conversation saying, if it was my daughter working and a man had pulled her into the photo booth, like, why is that automatically worse? They're exactly the same thing. I think that's really important about like having both male and female, addressing consent from both sides. It's important, especially with, boys as well, learning what's, right.
Definitely. As a mom of a 5-year-old boy and a 2-year-old daughter, my son is super affectionate and my daughter is not. And so my son is always wanting to kiss his sister and hug her, and she is not in the mood most of the time. So we've taught him, if you don't want her to hit you, you have to get consent. You have to ask her, because she will. She will hit him. So we are going to be heading into reader questions, but I wanted to take the last couple of minutes and have each of you share about your newest book and anything that you want to say about it, and anything you're excited about to have readers experience. We're just going to start with Amelie, then we'll go to Eloisa, and then Erica, and then Vanessa. So go for it, Amelie.
Oh, awesome. So my next book is The Princess Stakes, and it is a diverse Victorian romance that I'm very excited about. I did a lot of research, like I talked about earlier, into Sophia Duleep Singh, who was a princess in Victoria's court. And it's about this princess in India who's running from an assassin, and finds herself on the ship of the boy, now Duke, that she once spurned. So there's only one cabin, which is an awesome trope, and lots of enemies, enemy to lover, which is one of my favorite tropes, forced proximity, and then they have like a fake engagement sort of set up. And then, it addresses a little bit about what she goes through as a woman of color in the aristocratic circles. And also Riston, how he supports her as a white male. I really love this book. I think that, it was a challenge to write because sometimes, I'm, like I said earlier, I'm from the Caribbean. So a lot of my experience, I grew up on pretty much what was a plantation island. Every single inch of it is ex-plantation. My experience growing up on that as a descendant of indentured laborers is very different to, say, someone who lives in the United States, who lives in India, who lives in England. So I can only try to tell the best story I can, while trying not to, as Vanessa talked about earlier, you don't want to harm any readers. So I think one of the only way forward with diverse stories is to have more of them, as I said before. But I'm very excited about this story. It's a diverse interracial relationship. I'm in an interracial marriage. So I hope readers like it. I'm psyched about it. And I hope we have many more stories to come.
Thank you. Eloisa, what are you most
Can I
excited
just ask,
about?
are we talking about the book that we have out right now, or did you say the next one?
You can do either.
Oh, well, okay. The book that's out right now is this one, which Wild Child, which I think is very funny. So I enjoy it. I will just give you a hint about the next one because I just finished it, and so I'm really proud of it right at the moment. So, we all know that like most of the dukes have been rich and the heroines have been rich. Well, my heroine in the next one, which is called How to Be a Wallflower, is rich, but she made her fortune on toilets. Her father invented the S-bend in the toilet. And her hero is also rich, but he's American and he made his money fur trapping. So he shows up, and I really enjoyed writing a book that wasn't where everyone didn't have perfect manners and where things weren't what you might expect. So I'll just tell you one scene when the heroine is really expecting an engagement ring and he's crouching down beside her, and she opens up the velvet box, and there is a polished bear tooth in there, which has got gold on sapphire rings, sapphire stuck into it to make it look more expensive. And I just, if I'm laughing when I'm writing a book, my hope is that readers laugh. I laughed a lot writing Wild Child. There's just a lot of characters, and I laughed a lot writing Wallflower, and I think we all need that right now.
Yeah,
like
we do. And I loved Wild Child. It was super funny. Erica, what is what's your next thing, or what is the thing that's out now?
Okay, so my newest series is The Wild Winchesters, which is about a diverse family of caper committing siblings. And The Duke Heist just came out in February. So the concept is kind of Leverage meets the Umbrella Academy in Regency England. So you have these Robin Hood orphans out doing Ocean's 11 style heists to help the people who have no other recourse and finding love along the way. In the Duke Heist, Chloe intends to recover a stolen painting and inadvertently kidnaps a Duke in the process. And so that was just a really hilarious scene for me as well. It's a lot of fun. Neither of them are expecting to be in the situation that they are, and things kind of spiral from there. And the next book in the series, which comes out later this year, The Perks of Loving a Wallflower, is very dear to my heart as well. I'm very excited about this. It features I don't know how much I can tell you without spoiling the Duke Heist. But it's going to be another fun-filled, heist-filled romp.
Awesome. Thank you. Vanessa, what is your exciting thing about your latest novel or your next novel?
Well, my novel that releases April 27th is An Earl, the Girl and the Toddler. This follows a Duke, the Lady and the Baby. I'm still just amazed they let me get away with these titles. I'm just putting that out there. But The Widow's Grace is back. The Widow's Grace is a secret society of women who are purposed to help widows during a particular time frame in the Regency. Um, Widows were at the mercy of their late husband's family. So if they didn't like you, the dower that you were supposed to get, which is your income, they can make that really problematic. They can gain custody of your children. And so there's these women that have been left destitute across England, and the Widow's Grace saves them. And this time up, one of the Widow's Grace members, Jamina St. Mar, our lovely amnesiac from book one, she's on a quest for her own mission. She wants to find out who she was. She only has 2 years of memories, and most of those are about Bedlam. So it's going to be a fun for her to figure that out. And then the man who seems to have all the answers but won't talk to her is the new Earl of Ashbrook, who is Daniel Thackeray. He's the barrister from book one. He's Lady Shrewsbury's nephew. Lady Shrewsbury runs the Widow's Grace. And he just wants to raise his little daughter and keep his aunt out of jail. That's the only thing. Well, maybe in a mistress. That's the only 3 things he wants. And we'll see how it all ends up. And Earl,
Awesome.
the Girl, and the Toddler.
Awesome. I love those titles, by the way. So we have our reader questions. FN wanted to ask, there are so many romance books already. How do I make something new that's totally different? Is that even a good idea, or is it better to not write something distinctly different? And I'll direct that at, let's go with Eloisa.
I can answer that just because I was just thinking about it. I think one way to figure out how to write something different is to think about cliches and people who tell you what not to write. So they say do write a duke or a fireman or a businessman. Don't write a singer. Well, I don't know about you, but I happen to be obsessed by contemporary rock star heroes. So I think if you take those cliches, the ones that say, things like that, or you can never have a religious person in a romance, or the heroine can never be a stripper. Look at those rules and flip them, and I think that you'll have something really original and something that all the readers will be talking about, and then they'll jump at.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing you can do is gender flip. Like if there's an idea of something that you really love that's really popular, flip the genders. Make it, if it's a story about a hero, make it about a heroine. That's worked for me.
That's awesome.
Or
One of our other.
I was going to say,
Go for it,
sometimes just look at present day, something that's happening currently, and imagine what it could be in the past. For historical romance. Just think about what it could be in the past, and that'll take you on a tangent.
Yeah. This kind of closely connects to that last question. This question is from Karen. Karen wants to know, what is your research process? What are the challenges of creating dialogue in particular that's authentic and historical, however, is engaging to today's reader? Who wants to tackle that?
Erica does.
I was going to say, Erica.
I will get you. Come on, you're really good at dialogue.
I actually don't have a lot of good dialogue advice because I do think it's something that comes to me a little bit more naturally. But probably the main thing that I do comes afterwards. So I write the scene, how I feel it, how I hear it, whether it's snappy or whatever. And then I go back afterwards and worry about hunting up the etymologies in the Oxford English Dictionary or whatever it is. I would say that the best advice I can give is to not let that hold you down. Don't get stuck on those elements when you're writing your first draft. Just try and get the scene out if you can. Sometimes something comes up and you get stuck and you can't move forward with the scene without knowing a specific thing, if it'll change the plot. But if it doesn't, then in my experience, try and write it the best way that works for you. Go with that flow, and then worry about the fine details later.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else want to answer that one, or we can move on?
I like researching all the insults. Yeah, I like researching all the insults and the weird words from like
Oh yeah.
Collie
Yeah.
Wobbles.
I like reading. I like reading scripts, and they don't
Mhm.
have to be historical. It's really hard to write dialogue, I think, unless I'm Erica. I find it really difficult to be funny. Right? We all wish we were funny, like the 10 minutes after you've had the conversation where you could have been funny. Well, you can be if you're the writer, right? I know you're funny, but I think of it the next day. So I read a lot of scripts. If anyone tells me there's a funny TV show or anything funny, I will track down that script online. They're all online. So
Mhm.
I read, madcap movies from the 20s. House scripts are great. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. I don't care. I want to see how people construct things that are funny, because for me that's the hardest. Like sex dialogue's kind of easy. It's like, yeah. The rest of it is more difficult.
Vanessa,
The
did
one
you want
I was going to say, the one trap is if you read period correspondence, that's not how they actually talk. Period correspondence are extremely formal. You will see them without contractions. But if you go and you look at Jane Austen and you read her dialogue, you'll see there's plenty of contractions in there.
Yeah.
So that's the caveat.
That's great advice. Each of you brought something a little bit different that writers can try to improve their dialogue. What about Sydney is asking, you've written books in a genre that often, undeservedly, goes unrecognized in the literary community. What do you hope people will take away from reading your books and speaking on this panel? And I'll direct that at, let's start with Vanessa.
I hope that people will understand that the romance genre is wide and diverse, and there are stories for everyone, every persuasion, every blend, and to take a chance, just pick up a book and dive in and experience the world, because you're going to be guaranteed a happy ever after, and everybody needs to read those upon occasion.
Absolutely. Amelie?
Yeah, 100% agree with that. You know what you're getting when you're reading romance. And, as Vanessa said, as I said earlier as well, like there's just something for everyone, which is, the safe space to explore anything that you would like to read. You can find in Romancelandia, which is incredible. And books have always been a safe space for me growing up. And I think, they always will be.
Awesome. Well, let's end out with Lindsay's question. What's your all-time favorite book? And we can go with Eloisa first.
My all-time favorite book. I guess I'd have to say something like the collected works of Shakespeare. I mean, I spent my whole life teaching Shakespeare, but it kind of fits as an answer to what you were just saying as well, because literary fiction is judged by the best book in the genre, right? And romance is always judged by the worst. And if we judge poetry by the worst poem, I can tell you, as someone who's taught undergraduate creative writing, that would be a desperately low-ranked genre. So one thing I always say to people is, watch yourself, because when we're talking about books that are mostly written by women, that are written for women, that are mostly read by women, that address, say, sex from a woman's point of view, it's your knee-jerk reaction. Maybe I read literature, I read to be this and that, and it is often sexism at the base of it. Yeah. And we need to look out for that. Even those of you who are snobs, like me, who would take the collected works of William Shakespeare onto the island, we still need to watch ourselves, as with so many other things.
Erica, favorite book. What is your favorite book?
Oh, those questions are always the hardest for me. I never have a favorite anything. They change all the time. I would probably have to say, for historical romance, I'm going to do a collected works as well. I loved the collected works of Julie Garwood. Her historicals were inventive and funny and really sold me on the genre.
Awesome. Amelie.
Oh gosh, I know this is like a tough question because I could never decide. I think as a kid, probably my favorite book was the compilation of Grimm's fairy tales, just because I always liked dark fairy tales, where Cinderella, her stepsisters cut off their heels, because I have like really dark taste. I'm kidding. And then for historical romance, Judith McNaught was a go-to, and I had my books are so dog-eared, the covers are falling off because I've read them hundreds of times.
Mhm. Awesome. Vanessa.
Well, I'd probably have to go with like Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre. I have a slightly gothic bent. In romance, still slightly gothic bent, would be Winter Rose by Linda Windsor. I think is amazing, and Something Like Love by Beverly Jenkins. Those are my favorites.
Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you, Amelie, Eloisa, Erica, and Vanessa for joining the conversation. Thank you for joining today's panel. And viewers, don't forget to support the local bookstores, the Ripped Bodice for these books from these authors. And we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Elle.
Thank you so much, Elle.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elle. This was wonderful.
Yeah, great questions.
Awesome.
Bye, guys.
Bye.